Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me on today's webinar. Sorry to those of you who were going to attend this morning, but we had a little internet outage here, unfortunately, so that stopped play in that case. So if you've had to join this afternoon, thanks for your patience in that one. Now, for those of you who are on YouTube and Facebook, welcome. For those of you in the webinar room, welcome to you as well. If you want to ask a question, please do. It's all about interactivity. So if you put a question in the Facebook comments or YouTube, that will come straight through to me and I can see those no problem at all. And the same goes for the webinar room. If you want to ask a question, just pop it in the Q&A section there. That just keeps it outside of the chat so they don't get mixed up. If you want to hide the chat, just hit that little button there and then you'll get a bit more space on screen for Capture One as well. So let's go straight to it. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we are going to discuss exporting your pictures. This is the finale, if you like, in the series of improving your efficiency, whether you're importing, editing, or exporting. So we won't necessarily cover every facet of exporting, but we'll try and give you a few tips and tricks to make that process a little bit simpler and easier. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the difference between using the export exporter or export window or working directly in the interface. There's a couple of differences which you'll have to know about that. We will talk about tokens, which is not something we would be able to cover every single token today, but hopefully that will give you some inspiration. And then we will also look at a couple of examples of the sort of recipes that you can build as well. So that's the plan for today. Keep the questions coming and I shall do my best to answer. I'm on my own today, so there might be a short delay in answering questions, but let's get started. So first of all, if you haven't picked up that there's a new version, Capture One 15.3, there is a slight change to the icons up here. So if you're not familiar with that, that's why these look different. By default, they're bigger as well, and they have text underneath just to help you see the name of that tool tab and give you a clue of what's in there. But if you would prefer to have them smaller, you can go to either icons on text like so, or you can go to compact mode as it is here. So if you're not aware of that change, that's what's going on here. First thing to point out. Secondly, typically to access the export dialog, and when I say export, means we're going to final formats like JPEG, TIFF, etc. So that's what I mean when I say export, just to make that clear. Typically, you would go via this window here, the export window. You would select your pictures and then you're ready to go ahead and export. So that's one method. If you prefer and you don't like the fact that you're going into another dialog, even though if you measure it, it's the same amount of mouse clicks pretty much, you can right click just in the dead space up here and you can add a tool tab called export. And that will load up every single tool that is designed for export. So if you prefer to stay in the main interface, that's one way. If you would prefer to go into the export dialog, that's the second way. Now there is a distinct advantage of using the export dialog. So we need to cover that because that's quite important. But if I add that, then we've got our export dialog here, and then we've got all our export related tools. So why the difference, or what is the difference? So first of all, let's just select 4 pictures like so, and then decide, okay, we want to export these to JPEG, TIFF, or whatever. So if I tap on the export dialog, that opens up the exporter, and by default, it will have this additional viewer, which is super useful because that's proofing, if you like, the result of your export. So you'll be able to visualize and see what your final export will look like. So if we turn off the viewer in a minute, you would just see the thumbnail view like so, but the viewer is really handy. So first of all, if I change this to 100%, and then we go through a few different export recipes, and these are presets of different ways how you want to export your pictures, so a JPEG, a TIFF, or whatever. Capture One is simulating exactly what that export is going to look like. So this is a Instagram type recipe. We'll dig into a bit more about setup shortly. but you can see here it's resizing it to a width of 2160 pixels. If I go to the TIFF one, this is suddenly going to get a lot bigger because this particular recipe is scaled to 100%. So as we go through these pictures, so again, if I go back to the Instagram one, it's going to simulate the size and output on screen. TIFF, it's going to get much bigger. What it's also going to simulate is, if we scroll down a bit, a few other things. First of all, your ICC profile. So it's going to render what the ICC profile will look like. So as you switch profiles, it's going to alter slightly. Of course, depending if your monitor can display that color gamut and all that other stuff. We don't have time today to go into a massive color management digression, but it's essentially proofing your ICC profile as well. It's also showing you how the sharpening is going to look. And this is something which is often overlooked and will certainly help you be a little bit more efficient, is the effect on downsampling or upsampling a photo. So if we upsample a photo to a great amount, let's say you took a shot and you went 300% up, you would probably think, okay, that's going to degrade my quality sharpness to some extent. Yes, it will. The same goes for if you downsample a photo as well. So reducing the size of a picture will also reduce the sharpness to some extent. So we need to compensate for that. And the whole point here, to stop you having to create, if you like, a master large TIFF file and then reduce it down in Photoshop, tweak the sharpness and do all that kind of stuff, we can deal with that in one hit in Capture One. So for example, if we take our Instagram optimized one, and you'll see in adjustments, we've got a few different options here. So no output sharpening for screen, output sharpening for print, we'll come back to that later, or kill all the sharpening. Whilst I'm on it, let's just discuss that. If I say disable all, that will just remove all sharpening from Capture One, which is also a good efficiency tip. So if you want to export a picture which you need to hand off to a retoucher and they've said to you, don't give me any sharpening, I want to handle that selectively, or I'm going to do a whole bunch of retouching, so working on a sharpened file doesn't make sense. You can at least keep the sharpening on whilst you're editing for yourself, and then simply by adding disable all to your export recipe means that you can deliver that exported file without any sharpening, without having to go to your refine tool tab and turn the sharpening off. So again, that's a much better way, a more efficient way to export. But in terms of sharpening, so if I say output sharpening for screen and then I just do something stupid like this, you can see it's instantly proofing the amount of sharpening which we have. By default for screen it's around 80. You will need to test that for your own preference and size. So the defaults generally are pretty good, but we all have different ideas about how much sharpening we would like on our pictures, and also the subject. If it's a portrait, you might not want to sharpen it up so much. So test that out for yourself, but the default is a good starting point. So the export window, this is the subject we're on at the moment. This is constantly proofing your photo to give you an idea of how the export will look based on the selected, not ticked, we'll come to that recipe in the window, but make sure you set it to 100% first, and then you'll see the size, sharpening, ICC profile simulated in the viewer. So that's super, super useful. We'll build one with a watermark as well, and then you'll also see that in the viewer. So if we close this down and talk about, okay, well, what's the difference in just working in this space here in the main interface of Capture One? Well, first of all, if I zoom to 100%, like so, and we go through these recipes, you see nothing changes. Okay, because the viewer is showing you exactly how the photo is edited in Capture One. The profile that's in use is set here, also important. So by default, we're viewing at Adobe RGB. Now you can choose to switch to one of your currently built process recipes, or you can pick an RGB output down here. If you say show all, you'll get a whole bunch of other stuff. But by default, the viewer is proofing to Adobe RGB. Regardless of whatever export recipe I have picked, nothing will change. If you want to see recipe proofing, then you must turn it on. I've added this to my toolbar. So if I right click and say customize toolbar, you'll find it here, recipe proofing, and you can just drag it anywhere onto your toolbar. But this is now a manual process where, okay, I want to see what my Instagram recipe does. I'm going to turn on proofing and away we go. Now we get the simulation, as long as you've set to 100% of how it's going to look. And we're also going to see, if I can find it, things like the export sharpening as well. So if you want to make this behave like a proofing viewer, like the export dialog, then you've got to manually turn your proofing on and off like so. So that's really the critical difference between working in the main Capture One space or working in the export space. I personally favor going into the export space because then I can have a quick check and proof everything. It's no less clicks really than turning on proofing here. But if you're working in a high pressure situation, delivering loads of exports, then it's quite nice to be able to kick off an export and go back and do something else in Capture One. And we talk about shortcuts later as well. But that's your choices. Okay, let's check some questions in case anything has come up. Andrea, that's just my paranoia, I'd say. Let's make this quote a bit bigger. For no 1080 long edge, I tend to double it. I might be completely wrong there, to be honest, but I go up to 2160. If anyone thinks I'm completely foolish for that, then you can tell me and I'll adjust it. But I'm sure I had an experience in the past where exporting to 1080 was affecting something negatively. But if I'm wrong, let me know. Let's see. Yes, they're lupins. Exactly. We've had this discussion. Nice bluebells. Not actually bluebells, although that seems to be up for debate. Right. And just checking questions over here before we move on. Dick says the icons are too large on the new view. Well, that's why we can go to compact mode. But if we talk to actually customers before and after this change, there's actually, like a lot of these things, 50-50 camp who prefers the large icons and the new icons. I would say for a learning experience, it's much easier dealing with the larger icons and the name of those tabs. And then once you get into Capture One, you can think, you know what, I know what this means and I'd like to customize and I would like to build my own interface, which is exactly what we would hope you do. It's all very well us building a default. No two people are going to use Capture One in the same way. So pushing you towards customization with an additional little option here, like place tools right, give you a hint that workspaces exist. And we always have your previous workspace from the last version of Capture One. We think, and we've got a pretty good intelligent data on that, that will give you a better experience. Is there any way to open the correct Finder path after exporting it automatically? Yes, if you have notifications on, and we will look at that when we export as well. All right, let's move on. I need to look at my notes because this is like a bit more of a heavy webinar in terms of getting things in the right order. So let's set up a process recipe just so you're aware of the steps. So if I go into my export dialog, let's get more than one photo. Let's just select all of these, say export, and let's say we want to do a new export recipe. Very simple, plus minus button down here. So let's make a new one. Let's make a proper Instagram recipe, shall we? So let's make a new recipe, and that was Andrea. So let's call this Andrea's Instagram, because you're probably right, to be honest, Andrea. And then what we really need to do, let's just hit enter. We just work our way down through the various different tools and fill those in. Now, if you're in the exporter and you can't see this whole list of tools. Down here is show all options. If you want to keep it simple, that gives you the bare minimum of location, name, format, and a summary. Without watermarking, without output sharpening, just the bare bones. But if you want to see all the options, we can turn that on, and then you have access to all those tools. If you've added the export dialog, then it will just add, sorry, export tool tab, then it will add all the tools by default, okay? So let's go back in once more. So we do an Andrea's Instagram, then it's a case of setting up everything as you wish. Now I'm currently in a session. Behavior is relatively similar for a catalog. The first time you ever open Capture One, you'll be prompted to choose a default folder. So if you're exporting from a catalog, you can say, I want all my exports to go to this place. By default in a session, it will always go to the output folder. So that is this guy here, like so. So everything will always go to the output folder. Let's clear it out actually, because it's full of junk from various exports. So by default, a session will always go to the output folder. A catalog will actually ask you to specify your default location. Now recipes can have their own location, or they can have the universal location. So tell you what, if I just open a catalog for a second, let's just open this one briefly. So you'll see we've got a boat. Let's export a boat, and you can see here we've got catalog default quick exports. If I reset this tool, it's going to always ask you to choose a folder the first time. So if I say choose, let's just make a new folder called all my exports, spelled incorrectly. Then whatever process recipe I use, it's going to use that folder, unless I choose a specific folder for a specific recipe, which I can choose here. So any recipe can point to that default, or it can have its own location. So it's really important. So recipe can be independent, or it can go to that global location if you like. If you want to update that global location, that's what this little icon is here for. Do you want to change the catalog default output folder? Yes. Okay, so let's go back, say not now, and let's open up this session again. Go back into our export, but by default, the session will take you to the output folder, which makes sense really. We're going to come back to subfolder in a second and do some more advanced stuff with that. Meanwhile, we're dealing with Andrea's Instagram. Naming, we're going to come back and deal with some more advanced stuff with that. But you can see here, by default, it uses the image name, which is the same as the raw file here. Now, I personally find it helps to rename your files on export because it gives you a better indication of what that file is. Okay, so for our Instagram one, we're going to choose a JPEG. This will also proof the JPEG quality. So if I just go to fit screen, it'd be hard to see on a webinar broadcast, but as you rack down the quality, you'll start to see the JPEG artifacting. If we just zoom to a stupid amount, so you get what I mean, you can see the JPEG artifacting. If I put this up to 100, it goes away. So you can bias and think, okay, do I care about JPEG artifacting? Do I want it to go away? So you can use that slider to visualize what the JPEG artifacts look like. So let's just go around there. Typically you would do that 100%, so you could see, do I get a real world effect on the image? This is for Instagram, so it's going to be sRGB, and resolution wise, the width we're going to have in pixels. See how that changed? As soon as I did it was, what was it, Andrea? 1080, like so. So now that gives me an impression of what my picture is going to look like. Crop, we can actually ignore the crop, which is also handy for retouching. If you're exporting to Photoshop file, we can embed a path on the PSD file which shows the retoucher where the crop is anticipated to be, but it gives them some space around it. So if they need to grab sections for retouching, they can do so. So that's super useful. And then we're going to add our output sharpening for screen. We can tweak in the amount of sharpening we want to have. Watermark we're going to come back to, and then you can decide which kind of metadata you want embedded. David said earlier that's often a good tactic if you don't want someone to know where the shoot is. which is a good point actually. Or if your camera doesn't have a GPS, no problem. So now, Andrea, we have set up your correct Instagram output. By the way, this often comes up. Change the resolution to 72. Nope, you don't need to do that. You could put 1 billion pixels per inch in here and it would make no difference. If we're exporting to a width in pixels, we're getting that finite width or height or dimensions or whatever. Absolutely no point changing the resolution. The resolution is only critical when we're exporting to set dimensions. So if I wanted to export 20 by 40 centimeters, then I would need to give Capture One a pixels per inch resolution. So Capture One would then calculate the number of pixels required to create that resolution. But on a pixel based export, you do not need to change anything in resolution at all. So that would then be Andrea's recipe. So let's just hit export. To the person who said, how do I get to the Finder? You're not going to see it because it's on my other monitor, but essentially make sure you've got notifications turned on, because I've now got a little notification there. And if I press show, it's going to bring up my output on my other monitor, like so. So here we go. Now I had 2 process recipes ticked, one up the top, one at the bottom. So we've got 8 separate outputs, like so. So there's all the different shots. But that's the best way to get to the Finder. Make sure you've got your system notifications turned on, and then that way you'll get notified as soon as it's finished. On the Mac, you get that slide out in the top right hand corner. If I wasn't using 2 monitors, you would see it here. On Windows, I think it pops up on the taskbar, if I remember correctly. So it's pretty simple to make a recipe. Let's pop it up there. So selecting it, if we just go into the export dialog, selecting it will proof it in the export dialog itself, checking it on, which means I want to use that recipe when I hit the export button, which is currently behind my head down here. So that's the difference between selection and a tick mark. Gerald, when will C1 no longer require proofing to be turned on to view watermarks when using the export tool tab watermark tool? It won't, Gerald, because the viewer in Capture One does not proof unless you turn that button on. Okay, so that's not going to happen. So if you set up something with a watermark, then you're only going to see it if you turn proofing on, like so. That was an intentional change in, I can't remember when we added the exporter, 21 point something, memory escapes me. But if you want to see proofing all the time, just use the exporter and then you'll see it. You can also set up a shortcut for proofing if you wish. You can see the default here. If you would like to change it to something else, you can also do so in the keyboard shortcut editor. So you're only a button click away. Fawn Lies, what a great name. Hang on. I'm exporting multiple recipes for the same client. Is there an easy way to update a setting like location or naming on 2 recipes at the same time? Yes, there is. And I'm so glad you asked that, because we're going to have a look at that shortly as well. Does sizing ever upsize the image? Does it notify you? Yes, it does. If we scroll down, you will see under here, you see the scale. So if you upscale, then you'll see it here. It'll be, I think it turns red actually as well. Let's just put in a stupid, let's say 10,000 pixels, if it will accept that. 168%, so you can see the scaling here. Let's just change that back to something sensible. Like so. So you can see the scaling. Just checking on questions. When you export using 2 different monitors, which one does the notification tell you about? No, it doesn't give it to you in both windows. That's a Mac limitation. So it's on your primary monitor. So whatever you have set up as the primary, that's what it's going to export. That's what it's going to pop up the notification to. I won't change my monitors now because you're going to see all kinds of crap on there. Okay. what should we do next? Because I just need to check my notes again. I think now is the good time to talk about efficiency with regards to naming, as Fawn asked as well. Let me just check the questions over here. I think we're pretty good, actually. Yep, so far so good. Okay, all right, so let's talk about tokens, because this is where we can really boost up the efficiency. Let's just check my output folder is empty, and we'd show you a couple of things. So let's select all these pictures, say export, and let's say we want to do a couple of different exports at the same time, which you saw. So let's go for Andrea's Instagram, and let's go for JPEG, full size, highest quality. You can reorder these, by the way, if you wish. So now I'm telling Capture One I want to use 2 different recipes. So if we flick through these, we can see how that looks. If we go to highest quality at 100%, then we can adjust our recipes as we looked at before. So all of these are going to go into the session default output, and if it finds an existing file, which will be interesting in this case, it's going to add a suffix, so it's going to put a 1 at the end of it. So let's just go ahead and export these 4 pictures and see what happens. So they're exporting, so that's going to do 8 exports pretty much. Notice that little message says we can close that, you don't have to stare at it. Now because they have the same file name, we've now got this one, which is our 1081 for Instagram, like so. And then we've got this one, which is our full size. But this one's been appended with 1 because they have the same name. So that's not super helpful really, is it? So let's delete all those and improve on that. So for this recipe, our Instagram one, I'm going to tell to Capture One, put that in a subfolder based on some aspect of the photo. So this is where tokens come in. So what a token does is find some aspect of the picture and use that to create a folder, or use that to add to the naming convention. So if we click on this little box here, that's going to open up my location subfolder tokens, of which there are 60 odd different tokens. They are related to metadata. So it could be anything from the camera's serial number, to the aperture that you shot the picture at, to the shutter speed, to the camera make, the lens, the aperture, all kinds of stuff. The most popular ones are color tags, star ratings, because that means you can divide up your pictures by ratings and color tags. But a very useful one is this guy, which is recipe name. So I can either drag and drop it like so, or I can double click and then it will add it like so. So now Capture One, if we do sample path, if I make this bigger, you see it's going to go to my session output folder in its own folder called Andrea's Instagram. So let's do the same on this one, JPEG full size, subfolder. We can also do recipe name. Now, if you know the name of the token, you can just start typing it, and then you get a type ahead comment which says, okay, you probably want one of these, so let's go for recipe name. So now both these process recipes have the subfolder in use called recipe name. Now remember, I had to do that on both recipes because each recipe has its own independent, or can have its own independent output. So what happens if I export now? Let's just check that folder's empty. It is. So let's go and say export 4 images. Make sure you can see what I'm doing. Activity window pops up. And then we go show, and here we go. So now we've got Andrea's Instagram, 4 pictures there, JPEG full size, highest quality, 4 pictures there. Great, so now I know which is which. The only thing that could be confusing is if you were sending them to a client and the client was not as organized as you and started mixing these up, then of course I'm going to get this warning, a newer item named this already exists. So let's just stop that. So it would be nice if we could make the names unique as well. So let's do that. So I'm going to throw these in a bin. And also what we're going to do in export naming, we're going to add in a recipe name as well. And we do it for this one as well. And then we come to fawn lies. Then we come to your question about being able to alter all recipes in one hit, which you can do as well. So let's put recipe name as well. So now we're going to have the recipe name in the name. Did I clear out that folder? Yes. So now let's do the same thing again. We're going to export these 4 pictures using 2 recipes and say export 4 pictures. There we go. Notification comes up on the other screen. I could screenshot it for you, I guess. But if you hover over it, tell you what, let's do that. Just going to screenshot it for you, so you can see what I'm talking about. And make sure you have notifications turned on at system level. Where's that pesky screenshot? Here it is. That's what it looks like, hovering up here, up in the right hand corner. If you hover over this part, then it says show, and then you can click that, and then you're into the Finder. Now I have it set in my notifications to stick, so it doesn't show and then go away. It pops out until I do something with it. So if I've gone off to do something else, then I know that when it's finished, the notification is there. And there's Andrea's Instagram, and then you see the name has been tagged onto the end as well. So I pretty much have that set up by default on all my recipes. So if I ever look at a picture, I know just by the file name that it's set for this, highest quality, or it's set for Instagram. It's all very well sorting it into folders, but again, if you have a klutzy client or you're klutzy yourself, then that's not enough generally. Let's get rid of those and we do something else. Or you might like to sort it. Let's just change this into, whoops, undo that, sorry. This is a filtered collection, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm filtering by different star ratings. So let's, I don't think I've got color filter on. Let's change some colors. So let's have a red one. Let's have an orange, let's have a blue, and let's have a pink, like so. I'm going to select all of those and export. And instead of going by recipe name, let's add something else after that. So if you want to mash tokens together or combine them, you can do so. All we need to do is put a slash after it. And now we can add another token. So that means Capture One will make a further subfolder after this. So this could be rating, it could be color tag, it could be whatever, but let's do color tag. So if I tap here, you'll find color tag, double click, now adds it to this. Let's do the same on this one. Put our slash in, find color tag, and OK to this. Now you can save presets as well. So if you want to be a bit more efficient, then you can save these presets. Generally, the most efficient way to do it is set up different recipes that export by color tag, by recipe name, by star rating, depending on your workflow. I can't necessarily tell you this is the best way to do it because, of course, it's going to depend very much on your workflow. So let's export these 4 shots again, and then you'll see what happens. So Andrea's Instagram, blues, orange, pinks and reds, and then JPEG, blues, orange, pinks and reds, like so. So simple. Now that's created 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 folders in one hit. So it's all very well you saying, well, I could just do that individually. It's only 4 pictures. Multiply that by 500 or whatever. If you think of an event photographer who's banging out loads and loads of pictures, to be able to select 1,000 pictures and export and have them all sorted into, okay, these are your high reses, these are your low res selects, and then these are the 5, 4 and 3 star ones, is hugely beneficial. So let's delete those. Can have a very full waste bin at this rate. Let's check on questions, and then let's talk about this guy, which is the export cross recipe tokens. Bit of a mouthful, but it's easy enough. Okay, let me just check for questions. How do you specify the job identifier if you select that token? That's in the metadata, I believe. Let me just check. So let's just go in here. You're talking about this guy, Job Identifier, which is actually a very useful token, because what you'll do is you'll find it in the metadata. So if we go to our metadata down here, let's make this bigger so you can see what's happening. All of the metadata entry points here generally have a token. So Job Identifier is really handy, because if it means you're diligent with your metadata at the start of a job, you can fill out the Job Identifier field, and then on your export recipe, you don't have to touch it because it's dynamic. Very good, efficient tip there, Paul. Job Identifier should be buried in here somewhere. Job Identifier, there we go. So like Paul, if we put your name in here and we had that token in an export recipe, that makes that export recipe super dynamic because it's based on the Job Identifier. You just have to remember to fill that metadata point in. If you're using a token and there's nothing in the field that it's referring to, you'll see empty name in the folder or the naming convention. So if you've done a load of exports and you see empty name everywhere, it means you're using a token which is pointing to something which is empty, which could be a piece of metadata or something that simply doesn't exist as you've tried to pull it out. So that's a great tip. If I'd thought about that, I would have done that myself. Let's put metadata back over here. Can you do exports by document name? Yes, I'm pretty sure that's available. Let's have a look. Document name, yep, document name like so. So if you want to put the name of the session as the folder or the naming convention or whatever, then yes, you can do so. There's a super awesome one with sessions, which we'll look at shortly as well. Any other questions? I use JPEG Mini as a Capture One plugin. Yeah, if you really want to squeeze down the size of your JPEGs, JPEG Mini, which has been around for a long time but does pretty good JPEG compression technology, they also have a plugin for Capture One, so you can do it directly within Capture One as well. Okay, let's deal with the cross-recipe tokens. I think that's where we're at. So this is a way to quickly edit naming for and subfolders for all recipes at the same time. Okay, so it's a little bit of a head scratch, but once you see the mechanics of it, it's actually pretty straightforward. So let's do it with, let's edit our recipes here. So let's get rid of color tag for now, and then let's get rid of, well, let's get rid of all of this. So let's get rid of recipe name, and let's get rid of recipe name, and then let's also get rid of recipe name here, and let's also get rid of recipe name here. So this is just a more dynamic way of doing it, if you like. And it also means that if you're using a lot of different recipes, but the subfolder term that you want to use and the job name that you want to use needs to be a bit more dynamic to stop you having to go through every recipe and change it, this is a good way to do it. So essentially we have a token called subfolder, or we have a field called subfolder, and we can fill something in here. So let's do, if I just do one and then show you what happens, then you'll probably see how it works. So if I choose the recipe name token here and the recipe name token here, like so, then in all my recipes, I just tell it to use this dynamic content here. So this is going to look a little bit weird, but if I put in the token called subfolder, what I'm telling Capture One to do is to look at the contents of the subfolder, which could be a token or it could be something handwritten, doesn't matter. Okay, so all we're saying is, okay, Capture One, on this recipe, go and look at what's written here and use that. Same for the naming convention. If I put in if I put in job name, sorry, then we're telling Capture One, go and look at what's in this field here and use that, which is currently the recipe name. Again, if we wanted to mash different tokens together, we could do so. We could put a dash in between them to make the naming tidier. And again, remember that / makes a folder. So again, if I go to this JPEG one and put the same stuff in, so subfolder and image name, job name, like so. Now Caption's going to point to look at that. So did I empty that recipe out? Empty the folder out? Yes, I did. So now if we do the export form for your benefit, then let's say export and hope I got it right. So now if we say export, we've got Andrea's Instagram, the name there as well, and then we've got highest quality and highest quality in the name as well. But let's say if we didn't use the recipe name here, the job name, let's just say this was, well, actually we could do recipe name, and then we could mix it with text. Let's say we were shooting for Lupin's Inc, like so. We could add that to the end of it. And the same for this one. You see, it's because it's dynamic, I've only just had to change it here. So now let's just delete those. Go back. Hit the export for images. Looking here, Andrea's Instagram, we've got Lupin's Inc, like so, and then we've got JPEG full size, highest quality, like so. It's extremely helpful. I've always just ignored that panel. Yeah, it's a little bit, and to be honest, even when I was planning yesterday, like, how am I going to show this without completely confusing the hell out of everybody? Because it's extremely powerful. You know, the fact that we can call on a token here that calls on another token there gives you a lot of versatility and automation. It's just a little bit of a head scratch the first time you look at it to figure out the path that Capture One is making. You're welcome. You've made my day, actually, that someone would actually use that, because it's incredibly useful. As I said, it's just a bit tricky to figure it out. But essentially, whatever you put in here is going to read from that. If you use the job name token, it's going to read from that. And this can either be a token, or you can do typing by hand, or you can do a combination of the two, like so. So yeah, you're right, Baz Barbie. It's super, super powerful. It really is. What other ones could we do? We could do, let's do color tag, as we did that. And yeah, recipe name, let's do Lupin's Inc again. So let's try that. If there is a Lupin's Inc, that would be funny. Let's process these out, or export, sorry. So now we've got our different tokens. Oh, I've messed up somewhere. That's not what I was expecting. See, told you I could mess it up. Let's see, because subfolder, oh, okay, I want recipe name, and then I want color tag. Missed an important step, like so. So I think that's going to work. Recipe name, color tag, yeah, let's try that. Clear out this folder, that's good. Export for pictures, that's better. So Andrea's Instagram, blue, orange, pink, red, and then our various different, our naming convention as we saw before, and then our JPEGs with our naming convention, like so. Phew, just a slight error on my part. Now the big one, session subpath. Let's clear out these and explain what session subpath is. So session subpath you can find down here, like so, and say okay. Now what session subpath does, let's come out of this dialog for a second. What session subpath does is it looks at where this picture exists in the session and creates that same path in the output folder. So if I right click on this and say show in Finder, we can see this picture, sorry, it's on my other screen. This picture belongs in a folder called day 2, okay? If we go to this one and say show in Finder, this one belongs also in day 2. Let's hope I didn't pick everything from day 2. Let's look at this one. Show in Finder, where are you? Show in Finder. This is, oh, it's because it's on the other monitor in day 4. Damn you, other monitor. And then this one, show in Finder. This one's in day 6. Okay, so these pictures all belong in different folders. Let's just verify where this one is. Show in Finder. This is in day 4. So we've got day 2, 4, 6, and something else. Can't remember. Anyway, they're in different folders. So the biggie, the session subpath, let's say we want to recreate that same path in the output folder. So we would use session subpath. I think this is going to work. Love my confidence, eh? So let's try that. Let's check this folder is empty. Pictures, Iceland, output. Let's get rid of those. And let's press export. Wait for that to finish. Talk amongst yourselves. Where's my notification? So now we've got day 2, day 4, day 6, like so. So it finds where it belongs here and then recreates that in the output. So that can be really useful, certainly on like a multi-look fashion shoot, where you've got different look names, different fabrics, different garments, you name it. There's so many different ways you can divide it up. Or if you're doing headshots, you've got person 1, 2, 3, 4, and you want to divide that up into the output folder automatically. Some sessions have, you know, tons of capture folders, so that's a really nice way to divide that up as well. Right. I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which is, I would agree, not the most intuitive part of Capture One, is cropping to a specific export dimensions if you were going to print. And making sure the crop tool has the relationship to that particular recipe. So let's do that. Let me just check on other questions. Yeah, it seems insanely useful. It is. It was actually absent in the first iteration when we redesigned exporting, and then we realized that, you know, the error of our ways there and sorted that out, because you could still do that without using the cross recipe tokens, but it just made the whole process a lot quicker. So, and a lot less manual changing for you. Let's see. Dave says, is session subpath session specific? Yeah, it is. So that token is only useful for sessions. But a few others, before we move on, just a few others which you might find useful, is a document name, which someone commented already that was useful. So that takes the name of the document. You have the folder name, which is useful, Dave, in this context. So if we find it, or am I? Hang on, let's find it. Subfolder or collection name, sorry. Collection name, so that's the name of the collection which the photo is sitting in. And that could be an album, could be a smart album, it could be the folder that it's in. If you want to be specific about the folder, I believe it's called image folder name. So that's the name of the actual folder that the photo is sitting in. So in a catalog, if you've got like a smart collection of 5-star photos, but you want to sort them into the output folders based on the name of the folders that they sit in, the image folder name, then that's a super handy token for that. Plus you've got all the date stuff. You've got all those IPTC tokens going back to Dave about the Job Identifier. So if you are diligent with your metadata and think, okay, today I'm shooting for Mercedes, I'm going to make sure my Job Identifier says Mercedes in all my shots, then it means we could put that, instead of Lupins Inc., we could put Job Identifier here, and now that recipe becomes very dynamic and versatile if you remember to fill out your metadata correctly. Yeah, image folder name. That was it. I knew it was there somewhere. I just couldn't remember. Trying to think of any others which I use regularly. Format, that gives you JPEG, RAW, whatever, as part of that. But I find sorting by the recipe name is generally a good way to do it. But there's loads here. I mean, most of you will probably use 10% of these, but somebody somewhere has a use for that token. This is quite a handy one, variant position. So if you've got 3 variants, then you can sort them into different folders of variant 1, 2, and 3. So all kinds of potential there. A folder can belong to multiple collections, smart collections. Which one is picked up on export? So if well, it depends really, because right now I'm in this collection. So if I use collection name, it would use hero shots. Okay. If I used image folder name, it would find the name of the folder that each of the pictures belonged in your catalog and session. So collection name and image folder name might sound the same, but they're actually quite different. So collection name would use hero shots, image folder name would use, if I right click and say show in Finder, it would use day 2. So you might think, well, that's the same token. It really isn't. So if I was in Mario, if I was in 5 stars as an example, it would use this if I was in collection name. If I was using image folder name, again, it would use, if we say show in Finder, day 2. So 2 different uses there. But it's whatever collection is selected, not where it belongs, because this picture might belong in, I don't know, HDR, it's not, but let's say it belonged in HDR or hero shots, it would take this as the collection name because that's the collection I have selected. So hopefully that makes sense. Paul says, sometimes I import with a job name and want to export with that same name in the folder. Sounds like it will work for that too. Yeah, so you could use job name token, you could use image folder name. If you're in a session, you could use session subpath. You've got a few different options there. Okay, cool. Dimensions, that was it. So let's say we want to print a picture. And let's say we are going to whatever, 40 by 30 centimeters. So let's make a recipe for that. Let's just do it here. So I'm going to make a new recipe and we're going to call this 40 by 30 centimeter print. Like so. I'm just going to uncheck that other recipes so I don't get caught out. Those 2. And we're going to design our output dimensions. So we're going to have a TIFF because it's a print, and we are going to say my dimensions in centimeters are 30 by 40. And we are going to respect our crop, and we're going to do output sharpening for print. Why not? And you can see how that works. So we've designed our output recipe like so. Now when I choose my crop tool, if we right click, you can see under ratio we've got output, and that will bind the crop tool to the currently selected export recipe. So if I say output 40 by 30, so notice that the dimensions changed because we're bound to the currently selected recipe. Now as soon as I crop this, notice that it's constrained and that my dimensions are locked to 40 by 30. Because if I don't bind it to the output, let's put it unconstrained, if I'm cropping, it would be incredibly futile to try and, oh, okay, there we go, I've got 40 by 30, great, that's done. But what if I wanted the print to look like that? Then now I have to fiddle around and try and get it. So it's complicated. So if I say bind it to the output, the currently highlighted recipe, then I'm locked to 30 by 40, which is great. Now, if we wanted to proof that, we could turn on proofing and go to 100%. and then I would see the action of my output sharpening for print. So if I change that to no output sharpening, you'll see that it goes a little bit softer. Output sharpening for print, especially on the roof, you can see that change. Now, if I'm in my export dialog, then I don't need to do that. So if we're saying export, then I'm instantly, if I go to fit screen, I can instantly see exactly how that's going to look with those dimensions and with that output sharpening for print. If I do something silly and bust that up, then you'll be able to see that it's proofing immediately. Again, this is something you will want to test for yourself based on what you're printing on, the paper you're using, all that kind of stuff. So the default is just a suggestion, but I found on the limited printing I've done, because I don't print a lot, I really should, that the defaults work quite nicely. And it's based on either, well, this is viewing distance. So technically this should say viewing distance. So 100% of the diagonal, or you can do it inches and centimeters. So if you were going to view this picture at arm's length, that would be 40 centimeters, then Capture One would do this amount of sharpening. If it was hung on a wall and it was going to be viewed at 2 meters away, then Capture One would stick a bit more sharpening in. So it's based on some algorithms based on viewing distance. But you will need to test it, which seems to work best for your printing. Like so. And of course, this adjustment is independent for that particular output. So you don't have to keep going messing around with it. Again, to be efficient, you have different recipes for different outputs, and also you can vary your different tokens and create recipes for that based on those kinds of outputs as well. Fawn, so your session favorites are your folders? Not quite. So if we look at this session, going off book here a little bit. So we've got, these are all the various different folders in here. And if you wish, you can add them as a favorite. It just means that they're easier to find rather than scrolling down here. So a favorite is basically just a way to access a folder a little bit quickly. But you don't have to add them as favorites if you don't want to. Right? It's just easier to navigate. That's really the main purpose of that. Oh, let's go back to this one. Just checking. How do you decide your folder structure? How long is a piece of string? Lots of different ways, really. If you look on the YouTube channel, there's a video all about session management, which is an hour long, I think. And we can talk about it there. But basically, the way to do it really is divide up your capture folder into something that makes logical sense for the photo shoot. So if I was doing headshots, we'd have head 1, head 2, head 3 with their names, because if you have their name as the folder, it then becomes very easy to use that name in an export. So let's say this was my headshot, I could then use that folder name to update the naming convention. Or if I was super clever when I was shooting it, I would use the capture naming tool to use that folder as part of the name. Again, that's a token as well. So logically divide up the shoot, whether that's a tethered shoot or location like this one, into what makes sense for the shoot itself. So this could have been locations, for example. If this trip wasn't so hectic, I might have divided this up into different places we went to, but because in a day we went to 2 or 3 spots, then it made sense just to divide it up by the day and then any BTS stuff that was going on as well. But yeah, no hard and fast rules for that. You can figure it out what you want to do. I had no idea I could even do that. Excellent. I'm so glad we're making lives easier. That's what it is all meant to be about. Oh God, long piece of string question as well. What will be the best setting to send out to a printing lab? Have a conversation with your lab, I think, is the best thing. I saw a question earlier about, could I add my printer ICC profile here? Yes, you could. So if a lab sends you, this is our profile, then there's nothing to stop you adding that in your process recipe. So let's just, I don't think I've got any print recipes here, ICC profiles. Nothing for Epsom flying around in here? I don't think so. Well, let's say we've just thrown a CMYK profile. You saw that change. So we're proofing to what that profile looks like. So if somebody gives you their printer profile, then you could put it here, and then that will proof to that printer profile. But have a conversation with your print lab. They're the only ones that can tell you. You might find they will simply say, make sure it's Adobe RGB, which is also perfectly acceptable. We're running in generally an Adobe RGB color managed workflow with your displays and so on. So if the lab says, give us an Adobe RGB file, our printer is calibrated, we will make it look good, then that's also a perfectly acceptable conversation as well. But have a conversation with your lab and they'll tell you exactly the kind of resolution, in this case where we do need to define the resolution, that they expect, because that's going to have a bearing on how many pixels wide and tall your picture is going to be. Because if I make this 50 pixels per inch, then you'll see the scale is 85%. If I make this, there we go, 14%, sorry. If I make this 300, like so, then the scale is 85% for a 30 by 40 print. So this number is very, very important if you're going to specific dimensions, okay? Doesn't matter of fact at all if you're doing a pixel output. So ask your lab, what kind of resolution do you need if I'm giving you specific dimensions? I would argue it's better to output to specific dimensions rather than just giving them a massive TIFF file and saying you resize it, because if you're resizing it, you're in control of the sharpness, cropping, because if you just give them a massive TIFF file of the big picture, then you're handing off the decision of how it's cropped to them as well. So if you deliver the correct dimensions, the correct resolution, the right amount of sharpening, which you will probably have to test as well, then quite a lot of the control is back on you as well. Let's see, Augustine says he sends his pictures as Adobe RGB to QImage for printing at home with my Epson P800. There you go. Can you export the same folder structure like the high-res is to export all pictures on small JPEGs but like the original folder structure? Yeah, that would be, if you're in a session, just use session subpath. If you are in a catalog, you can use the image folder name. So that's the name of the folder which the picture resides on. But make a catalog with just a few pictures in and just experiment with the different tokens, and then you'll get a feel of how it behaves as well. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. And that pretty much takes us to the end. Oh, one final efficiency tip. Let's say you're editing pictures and you just want to export as you go, but you don't want to switch tool tabs because that's a click. You don't want to go into the export dialog because that's also a click. First of all, if you're in the export dialog by mistake, just hit escape and that will take you out. So that's a good efficiency one as well. But there's a really handy little shortcut here, which is export with previous settings, Command D. So whatever you did on your last export, if you hit Command D again, whether you've just got one picture selected or several, it will put it out with your last export. So whatever I've got selected here, I dread to think now. So if I tap Command D, then that starts it. And it's given me a warning that the scaling's adjusted because I've got my print one. But that just exports it straight away. So don't forget that export previous settings, Command D, Shift Command D takes you into the export dialog. But this one is really, really handy because once you're set up with your recipes, let's just put a full size one. As soon as, regardless of what tool tab I'm in and I hit Command D, then it kicks off that process. So job done. All right. So thanks for joining me today. As usual, it was longer than I thought. I thought, we'd do this in half an hour, but I never learn. So I hope that was handy. There's loads of cool ways that you can use export recipes to improve your efficiency. It's just a case of thinking, what would make my life easier? Okay, dividing by star rating, that would really help me. Is there a token for that? Keeping the folder structure, would that help me? Is there a token for that? Pulling out some piece of metadata, that would help me. Is there a token for that? So think about your pain, what would solve it, and then go looking for that token. Great, thanks again everybody, and we shall see you in the near future. I don't think there's anything scheduled for next week, but probably something the week after that. So take care, enjoy your weekends, and see you all soon. Bye now.